You're very welcome to this special edition of the Shortlist. My name is Johnny Campbell. I'm your host of the Shortlist and CEO and co-founder of SocialTalent. And we're feeling nostalgic this week. It's December. It's only a few days away from Christmas. It's our penultimate Shortlist of the year. And with over 40 unique episodes recorded and in the bag for 2021, we felt it's about time we look back at some of the best advice that we've been given for our shortlist of advice over the course of the last year. Every guest we've had on the show has contributed immensely to the shortlist, each giving their own piece of unique advice at the end and graciously imparting pearls of wisdom on all the topics that have shaped this incredibly uncertain and strange year. So to dive into this cornucopia of insight, I'm going to be joined by our very own Holly Fawcett. Holly's our director of content here at SocialTalent, and you may have heard Holly present as she's a guest presenter on this show as well. And we're going to be pulling out some of our favorites and discussing the kind of nuggets of advice in relation to some of the major themes that we've seen shape the conversation over the last year, from DE&I and wellbeing to the changing world of work and talent. Hello, Holly. It's great to have you.
Hello. Hi. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to look at all the great pieces of advice, as you said. There's some really, really, really great nuggets in here.
And it's our first show together as well, which is wonderful.
I know. People have this weird theory, Johnny, that you're Mrs. Doubtfire, because we're never in the same place at the same time.
I could tell you stories, but I won't start now. That's going to be a whole different show. But speaking of shows, I'd love to start off, Holly, with your favorite. You can think back, and I'm not assuming you've heard every one of the 40 episodes we've made this year, but does any episode particularly stick out for you? And if so, why?
I did listen to a lot of them this year. So I was on maternity leave for 6 months during this year, for those of you who don't know. And I managed to listen into quite a few during, quick nap times or whatever else. It was quite nice. My favorite one while I was away was with Allison Daly. And I really loved Allison's approach. So Allison runs an organization called Recruiting Innovation. And she has built a really incredible and highly scalable tech recruiter program with us at SocialTalent, but also as a curriculum for her own for graduates through Recruiting Innovation itself. But her approach to technology and diversity and adversity as well, I just found was really, really insightful to see, like, just that vision of how recruiting and talent, how it connects to every single part of the organization. It was really, really inspiring, particularly for those who are kind of feeling a little bit uneasy in their job in recruiting, or want to get into talent acquisition, want to get into recruiting, because she really did sell it as being this incredibly exciting place that people always fall into. And then her amazing call to action at the end to join and be part of a graduate grant program that she has to become a fully fledged technology recruiter. Saw hundreds of people sign up to that, which was incredible. But really, I just loved her verve and understanding and passion for diversity in technology in particular, considering that it tends not to be as diverse a place as we would like it to be. I just found her insights and her outlook just really, really insightful and really, really nice.
I only caught up with Allison yesterday. This exact time yesterday, I was catching up with Allison coincidentally. So I would love that was your favorite show. But what I want to try and do, and for those of you, by the way, who are listening, who are not joining us live or not seeing the video, myself and Holly are dressed in our Christmas jumpers, and Holly even has a Christmas tree in the background. And I am already roasting hot, so I'm going to probably take this off in a few minutes. So please do not be offended if you're watching the video feed, and hopefully it won't mess up our audio. What we want to try and do, and we'd love to get our audience who are listening live to join in and perhaps share your favorite moments from any of our shows this year, or your comments or responses to some of the quotes we're going to read out. So we're going to try and focus on 4 themes that we really, when we look back at the archive and we looked at the episodes, 4 themes really jumped out at myself and Holly as being, paramount across all of the episodes. And obviously some more focused on these than others. And we're each going to take you through each of those themes. And we've teased out some of the best quotes that we thought were relevant to those themes. And we want to reshare them with you, because sometimes maybe you had to jump off at the end of a short list. You didn't quite catch the quote. And maybe you listened for 39, 40 minutes and missed that last 60 seconds. And sometimes the goal was in the 60 seconds. And we want to reshare that with you. So I'm going to jump in with the first theme that was woven through a lot of the episodes throughout the year. And that was leadership. and particularly leadership best practices. And we've all looked at leadership in the last 2 years during the pandemic, because the pandemic has put such a focus on leadership. And it's been commented upon by many of our guests that in their organizations, leadership has been questioned over the last 2 years at an individual level. Folks who were leaders for a long time were having to relearn how to be a leader, and perhaps develop new traits that they weren't even aware were traits that leaders needed to have. And we all believe really will be needed all the way coming out of the pandemic, right? If there is such a thing. So I'm going to jump in with a few of those and just mention some of the folks who gave us some of the most insightful quotes. I'm going to jump in with the beginning of the year, Joanne Fennell. And Joanne, who joined us from Flex, the massive, big outsourced design and electronic manufacturer, 700,000 employees. Joanne joined us in the US, and she said, be comfortable with having smarter people in the room. If you want to progress and grow, you need to surround yourself with smart people and lean into feedback and learning. And that's, I think, echoes a classic quote around hire people smarter than you, which is something we discussed on the same episode. And that really stuck with me. And it was starting the year or in January last, have smarter people in the room. But the real bit that got me was lean into the feedback and learning, which I thought was really, really interesting. Kind of around the same theme, within leadership, we had Kelly Jones from Cisco, a great episode with tons of insight. And she told a fantastic story about the first time she was on vacation after she'd taken her leadership role. And I tried to get everything ready before she went so that her team wouldn't have to worry about anything when she went. And how her manager at the time took her aside and explained how that wasn't right. And that wasn't going to develop anyone. And her quote that I'll read out was, recontract with yourself about how you get work done. Every time you jump in to fix a problem, you're taking away someone's opportunity to learn to be you. I snipped that video, Holly, and I don't know if you were there. I showed it to 7 of our leaders who perhaps didn't see the call, because she really hit on something. And I don't think it's an obvious thing, right? Some of the quotes here was brilliant. It might be stuff that is obvious to some of us, or you've read in a book before in a different way. I really thought Kelly's quote wasn't obvious. That when you think you're doing the right thing by making sure everything's done and ready, you are taking away the opportunity for someone else to learn to be you. Like, I just thought that was really interesting. I know I've been that person, right? I don't know about you, Holly, if it resonated at a personal level. I've been the person who tried to cover and do the stuff. And I consistently thought I was doing the right thing. And hearing Kelly's story, was like, I'm not. That's not doing the right thing. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I had to, in preparing for going on maternity leave and going away for 6 months, I suppose for anybody who's going away for any period of time, whether it's a 2-week vacation or an extended leave, for caring reasons, or even just, I'm going off traveling the world for a little while, and I'm going to leave my role and allow others in my team to take over for me. That preparation, that ramp up to make sure that everyone's ready and everything is done and everything's in place, so that it's just paint by numbers after that. Like, the temptation to do that is so high. And gosh, when you're extremely pregnant, as I was, and I kept going as well, I went more than 9 months. The temptation is to really try and make sure everything is completely smooth, so that nothing could ever possibly go wrong. So when you come back, everything's going to be fine. But no, I completely see Kelly's point, because the opportunity for growth is in that gray, it's in that wrinkles, it's in the adversity of, something not being quite right. And the only advice I was able to give my direct reports upon leaving was, we don't know the answer either, so we'll figure it out together. If you come up against it, like, it's perfectly fine for you not to know the answer, because we don't either, and it's just a case of we will figure it out. We'll figure it out. And I'm very glad that did stand to them, because they all went in with that mindset of, sure, we'll figure it out. In the end, it did work out quite well, but absolutely that temptation for, like, everything is, every I is dotted, every T is crossed, everything's perfect, because people don't want to maybe see where the bodies are buried in paperwork or whatever. Just, that opportunity to grow and learn is immense. And in this day and age as well, when when you need to hire people smarter than you, that's when things are going to grow as well, not just for them to grow, but actually for things to grow and things to change, because doing things the way they always have done is a very dangerous way to continue doing your business.
It is, and there's two more sub themes that relate to that I'm going to call out. One was I'm going to bring two quotes together here actually. Steve Mayer, who came on the show, he's with Procore, and he joined us the day that Procore floated on the New York Stock Exchange, and he just rung the bell and ran over from the NASDAQ to an office building in New York. But he closed out the show by saying, be open to your own errors, mistakes, and learnings along the way, and make sure your team sees your vulnerability. Which I thought echoed a theme we've talked about being vulnerable as a leader and the importance of that to create psychological safety, which has been a big theme over the last couple of years. And it kind of fits nicely with Kevin Mulcahy's quote. And Kevin joined us a few months ago and said, don't be so sure of yourself, whether you're right or wrong. Be more explicit in showing the assumptions you hold. And if you remember, Kevin was an Irishman living in Boston who had just come back to Ireland for a few months for family reasons, and talked about the power of assumptions as a model for to look at your business and look at your plans, and rather than make loads of different plans just in case something might happen, is focus more on the assumptions and watch as the assumptions change. But saying, this surety that this is what's going to happen, that we've modeled it this way or that way. He talked about being more explicit in showing the assumptions you hold, which again is an element of vulnerability, I think, in saying I don't claim to have all the answers, because I think the traditional leader was expected to have all the answers and she had to come up with these things. It's saying, I believe this will happen based on these assumptions, but I know these assumptions may change and it may be incorrect. And so therefore you work on the assumptions. So I think those two went hand in hand. And lastly, on the leadership quotes, and again, two that go nicely together, Clark Powers joined us from World Vision. And Clark, as a gentleman, absolute gentleman, and he closed with, I think, one of the most unique comments, which was, each person is a masterpiece, valuable, a treasured work of art. If you look at and treat people that way, you'll be a better leader, which I just thought was beautiful framing, right? And it just brings be more vulnerable, but the heart, and just stop and look at your people as masterpieces, right? Which just was a treasured work of art. I love that framing. And it kind of goes as a companion piece to Colin Donnery's quote, which was only in the last few weeks when he joined us. Again, Colin Donnery, who works both in with Tourist Nua, which is an agency that helps get folks back to work in Ireland, and then FRS, a group that has a recruitment agency and RPO business here in Ireland as well. And Colin joined us from Italy, where he just begun his holidays.
Florentine holiday, wasn't it?
Yeah, from Florence. But he closed out with, giving people confidence is almost like a superpower. But on the other side, undermining confidence is so negative and can get out of control with managers and leaders. I think both of those speak to the humanity piece, in terms of, yes, vulnerability in the first piece, but the humanity was really, really important. I think there are two traits that we're looking for more in leaders. But I'm going to ask you, Holly, maybe to move on to our second theme and pick out your best quotes.
Sure. So our second theme is on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we had a huge range of speakers over the course of this year give phenomenal advice specifically around DE&I, but also some of those who spoke outside of DE&I, whose advice just really resonated so well with this theme. So the first one is goes back to actually my favorite episode of the year, which was from Allison Daly, and her piece of advice for the shortlist was, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That discomfort is a prerequisite for growth. So it hugely speaks back to what Kelly Jones was saying, and also Joanne Fennell, also being comfortable with having smarter people in the room. But being comfortable with being uncomfortable was really important, especially around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Matthew Jeffrey spoke to DE&I about stories. So, and Matthew being a really, really an incredible subject matter expert around employer branding, but saying, just listen to your team stories and to their views, and expose yourself to new ideas, which I think was quite interesting. Tauren Ellis also, Tauren being such a phenomenally almost pastoral speaker. And Tauren, if anybody's unfamiliar with Tauren Ellis, and just just Google his name, Tauren Ellis, and you'll find a lot about him, and a lot of his great speeches, and that are almost sermon-like. But his pieces of advice are so action-oriented, that I really loved. This one, which was, "What do you do now? If you're not willing to raise your voice, you're complicit. You're part of the issue." So essentially, that call to action: if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. So what do you do now? I thought was really great. And lastly, from Salma El-Wardani, that every time you're speaking, look at those who aren't and invite them into the table, which I felt was also quite a nice action task to in companion with Tauren around what you do. Well, Salma is very, very easily just, if every time that you're speaking, see who else could be here, see who else's perspective could be shared here, and use that platform to share with others. I felt was really powerful. There were so many stories from different people throughout the year that brought in from how to open opportunity for others, in terms of Salma, also Siobhan Sweeney as well from Open Doors, which is a mentoring program, and bringing people into different areas of work, and we're working with Open Doors at SocialTalent to help shape and create new people into recruiting careers. Again, a place people can happily fall into and do really, really well. But looking at what those organizational barriers are, her lovely piece of advice was, look at the barriers, particularly at entry-level jobs into your organization. That broken first rung of the ladder is often the one that people trip over the most. Once they're on the ladder, they can get there, but getting into the first rung can be the most difficult thing. So loads of actions, I think, that people had within their advice that people can take, very simple, small steps, as well as Tauren's kind of rousing cry of, if you're not here to solve the problem, then move away.
I agree. And Tauren and Salma together remind me that probably 2 years ago, maybe before the pandemic, I really didn't personally have much concept of allyship and privilege. And only in working with great people like Tauren and Salma, and hearing other great speakers and those who joined our platform in that period as well, Holly, it opened my mind to that. Like, starting with Tauren, it's not good enough to sit in the sidelines. You can't sit in the sidelines and say, well, I didn't cause the problem, or I didn't say anything. It's like, we didn't do anything to fix it, so therefore you are complicit. I think the world has moved in that direction to say that inaction is complicity. And then Salma, who's done so much and educated me through the trainings on our platform as well, and the talks I've heard her give, and as a guest on the show a couple of times as well, to be conscious, always conscious of others who's not speaking, who didn't get an opportunity, and leveraging your privilege, if you or what privilege you have in each context, to, again, back to Tauren, to actively do something about it. But I think maybe those two things go well together for me, that a lot of people who are not willing to raise their voice, as Tauren said, I think a lot of folks didn't know what they could do. They didn't know they had a superpower to fix things. But when you combine that with the introduction of the idea of privilege and allyship, you start going, oh, I can do something. I can stop the conversation and, lend my privilege to somebody else to make sure their voice is heard, or to give a perspective, or to stand up for somebody, or to whatever. You start to see that as a thing you have, where maybe folks didn't think they had that. I think those two concepts together work really nice. So don't sit in the sidelines, because we all can leverage some level of privilege to try and help others, be conscious of it, and be active, therefore, in that. So those two themes have resonated massively for me in the last 2 years. Yeah, great quotes.
Yeah. Also, the piece around privilege was such an interesting conversation, particularly how Salma frames privilege, because it can be easy to dismiss and say, I don't have as much as somebody else, therefore I don't have any. When really, we all have something in the bank, right? There's some piece of currency there that we have, that we can own, and also we can share. But simply being a voice, even if it isn't a terribly powerful one, and actually this goes to the last quote from Joanne Lockwood, that don't just. She had a really interesting quote about, one tiny snowflake doesn't make an avalanche, but lots of snowflakes together really do, and that's it. even a small voice with little privilege or little amplification, when lots of people do join together, it becomes a cacophony of sound. It becomes this incredibly powerful force that people can't ignore. And that's kind of what happened this and last year. You know, lots and lots and lots of voices suddenly realized that when they spoke together, big things will happen. And we harnessed that privilege. So Salma's understanding of privilege being such a thing that it is, we, every single one of us have a piece of privilege somewhere, some more than others, yes. And if you do have more than others, then it is, I think it's your duty, as to Tauren's point, it is just your duty to step up and share that. But even if it's something so small, by sharing it with others, your voice, I think, becomes louder. You gain agency, you gain power, and that's incredibly powerful. I think for anybody who feels that they need a platform of some kind to be able to stand up and do the right thing.
I'd agree. I'm going to move on to our third theme. In the interest of time, Holly, we got 4 to get through. There's been so many cool quotes. And the third theme we identified when we sat down and looked at these was well-being. Not surprisingly, probably, but it's been a big theme since the pandemic in terms of, me hinted at it in the leadership quotes, making sure you're looking after some well-being. And we had some great people on, including some of the folks you interviewed and had the privilege of speaking with as well, Holly. And, Linda kicked it off. Linda Jonas, for those who don't know Linda. Linda currently lives out of Germany, and she's one of the speakers on the SocialTalent platform. She joined the platform this year to develop a fantastic leadership program with her colleague and friend Jason Lawrenson. And they were teaching folks how to be leaders in a remote world or a hybrid world, and a fantastic program that we in SocialTalent went through as well in our leadership group, which was really, really insightful. And Linda's advice was, and it's really simple, but it's quite powerful: take time out from work. Stepping away from work for extended periods gives you clarity, I think was her point. And it was a simple thing, but take time out from work. And I did it today. I had a meeting scheduled, and my brain wasn't working after lunch. Just wasn't working. I had things to do. And I stopped and I asked my colleague, could I shorten our meeting from 60 to 30 minutes? And I did a nap. I did a 20-minute nap. And
napping is brilliant. Good job.
Yeah, I think we should all encourage each other to have naps, right? When you get a bit older, in your 40s, 50s, whatever, maybe it becomes more important, or when you've, young children who are keeping you awake at night, you need more naps. But take time out and don't feel guilty. Like, encourage it, like, and support each other for doing it. I think that's really important, right? And some other great ones that back that up. I look at Michel Guy Bergeret. And Michel works with the International Committee for the Red Cross. And he said, sometimes if you want to do more, stop talking about work. Take care of people in a sincere, transparent way, and look to build trust every single day. And that was a theme we just heard over and over again, Holly, I think, during the year, which, again, Mary Collins, who's another presenter on the SocialTalent platform, joined us towards the latter end of the year to say, in this post-pandemic world, we need to focus on building radical empathy, right? So that empathy, and Michelle's point about take care of people in a sincere, transparent way, I think that's just so important. We've seen it, the leaders who've shone in the last 2 years, they have parked the work and said, yeah, all right, and how can I support you? And not because they were told to, or they read an article in Forbes that said that, because they just cared. And I think we all have been allowed to care in the last 2 years, and hopefully that never changes. That's been a big change. You're meant to leave your personal baggage at the door. That's what I was taught when I was going into workplace, and not by any particular workplace, just culturally, I thought that was what you do. And I don't know about you, Holly, but that's kind of been the way. It's like, you have work and you have home, and please don't bring your personal baggage to the table. Whereas great leaders like Michelle and Mary are saying, no, you have to have radical empathy. Park work for a second. These are people first you're working with. They're colleagues, they're friends, they're, as Clark said in our leadership piece, right? They're masterpieces, treasured works of art. And there's overlap there, of course, but what are your thoughts on that change in the world where we have given license to everybody to actually show that they care? Is that the thing you see everywhere?
Well, the ones who are successful, yes, I see them do that for sure. But also there has been a reckoning for managers at a very transactional level who actively don't do that. Who put no, I need you to work this shift. Like, I don't care that your grandparent died or that you're sick with COVID. I need you to do this. And I kind of know where they were taught that, because I was also taught that in my first management role. I was very, very young. I was 21, and I was basically told exactly the same as you, Johnny. You leave your work, you leave home at the door, and this is work. And also, these aren't your friends. Even though you were their friend 2 weeks ago when you were their colleague, now you're their manager, and you can't be their friend anymore. And so you have to have this switch of being a manager, and that was dreadful. It was absolutely awful. But those types of incentives of no, you really have to be quite firm, and you need to say, you have to be an agent of the business. I was told that phrase, agent of the business, so often. And I don't really know what that meant. Specifically not in the long-term context, that's for sure, right? Because being an agent of the business also means looking after your people with that radical empathy that Mary Collins is talking about, because that's what's most important from a long-term perspective. But like, I was only reading a BuzzFeed article earlier today. Please forgive me for reading BuzzFeed articles. But certainly this one was about how these managers are essentially like a-holes, right? They're just like, here's like visual proof of text messages that they've sent their people when their parent has died or grandparent has passed away, and they therefore can't make it to work, or can't find childcare. Oh, I'm just really sorry, that's not good enough. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
It's a pandemic, for goodness sake, and the schools have suddenly closed. And we only had that last week here in this country, where we had a big storm. And as a precaution, all schools and all childcare facilities in the areas that were affected by the storm were just closed by the government overnight, at very, very late notice at night time. And every parent, I think, in the country was like, oh no, what am I going to do the next day? What do you do in that circumstance? You be a human. You be a human. And like, the work will get done. It mightn't get done right there and then, but it will eventually. And people love their employers and their colleagues who support them, because that's really what all that makes most sense there is to just treat them like humans, and they will act like humans, and they will do the right thing.
I remember January of this year. Again, this was in a lot of countries, I think, but in Ireland, we went home for Christmas, and our children came home for Christmas, and they didn't go back to school, and the schools remained shut for many months. And I remember the first week of January, when we kind of came back to work in SocialTalent, and we had our plans for the quarter. We just sat down as a leadership team and said, we're not going to get all this done, because our team, for different reasons, are going to have to look after their own kids, help look after other kids, if they've got siblings or friends who have kids. And we just have to accept that we're going to have to reduce our expectations, because this is life, and we'll get over it, and we'll catch up, and it'll be fine, or we'll just have to move all the deadlines out, whatever it is. But you have to be more realistic. And I'm going to close on this topic with Peter Coulson from Spotify, who you interviewed, Holly. And his quote was, it's all about relationships. Ensure you stay human in a technologically advanced world. So we had 3 themes so far. We had the theme of leadership, the theme of diversity, equity, inclusion, the theme of well-being. What was our 4th theme that you teased out? Our final theme, Holly?
4th and final theme was around proactivity. I think in this pandemic kind of time, it's tempting to just kind of batten down the hatches and just beaver away at things, but actually doing stuff in a much more strategic, proactive way will ultimately, going slow to go fast. That's a huge theme that came out this year. And some wonderful pieces of advice from people as varied as Dr. Beverly Kay to Theo Smith, who spoke about neurodiversity. Really, really interesting pieces of advice here. So Bev Kay's advice was that you have to recognize, and you have to verbalize, and you have to mobilize. Nick Johnston, who came to us from the Middle East, he was in Dubai at the time. I think he's now in Dubai. Sorry, he was in Abu Dhabi. Was that sometimes you just have to jump in the pool and get on with it. Kevin Oakes, this is a really, really interesting conversation, that your culture has changed in this pandemic. So be proactive and shape it to be the culture you want, and you want to see in the future. Kingsley Aikens, who is the networking master, absolute networking master, and has been to more countries than I can count, with Enterprise Ireland to promote Ireland as a destination for foreign direct investment, was to always remember something small about people and turn cold calls into hot coffees.
Love
It
that.
was quite nice. Theo Smith's was just do it. The reality is that we can achieve far more than we think we can, and I think this past 2 years has definitely shown us that, when we put our minds to it and we just, as Nick said, if you just jump in the pool, that actually we can get far more done than we think we can. Jen Lambert's was start from a place of yes, again, a positivity piece. Ger Finn, and this particular conversation, Ger Finn at the time was the head of HR and people for Twitter, was don't underestimate your influence and potential impact right now. I genuinely believe we're at a moment of outsized impact that will affect how we experience work for decades to come, but it could be seismic. So all of those are like they're neat little pieces around productivity, but ultimately there's a lot, I think, that where organizations have shaped themselves and they've grown organically to be the way they are, and we've organically developed diversity problems in organizations, we've organically developed inclusion problems in organizations, because that's they weren't designed that way. We kind of fell into this kind of routine because everyone else is doing it that way. But now we have the opportunity, even legacy organizations, to course correct, like massively course correct. And this is a huge opportunity for us to go, right, we're just putting a stop to it right now. And we're going to do things radically differently. We're going to jump in the pool, and believe it or not, we can do this. And even us, in our organization, I've known this firsthand, coming from that position of the beginning of the year, when I was saying farewell to everybody to go off for 6 months, and everybody else was stuck at home with children to be teacher on one side of the desk and parent and employee on the other, and then we had to move things out and get things up. We still got things done. We didn't change anything. We just moved the timelines, but ultimately things still got done. And weirdly, we found that extra capacity, or we reprioritized and realized that thing over there wasn't really that important. And you only get that with perspective. You only see the wood for the trees when you have to radically prioritize things. And sometimes just getting on with it ultimately will be really, really empowering. And that seismic shift that Jared was talking about, that outsized impact, that having this radical like stop start and going, nope, we're changing huge direction here, and we have that opportunity to, and everyone else is just following along because they can and they want to, and they're seeing this as an opportunity as well. I think all of those pieces loosely ring together into something of productivity. What do you think, Tony?
I think as March 2020 becomes a little bit further away, we can forget easily how strange it was, and that proactivity piece, just how I've never seen people as proactive as they were in those first 3 months. If you didn't understand what proactivity meant before then, you certainly did after going through that, whereas like you just to figure stuff out. And in our business, we're like, we can't get into a studio to film training content. We're a training company. We make content that for our customers. How the heck are we going to do this? We figured it out, that was a small example, but other companies and businesses did it fantastically, and families and everyone else and institutions and educators. I saw in Ireland, around the world, you saw things like garage forecourts, right? Your kind of petrol or fuel stations that were abandoned, converted into outdoor coffee shops and restaurants. There's several of them around the Dublin area where I'm living, and you go, wow, that's brilliant, because people couldn't go indoors. It's like, well, let's create an outdoor space that has shelter. Hang on a second, an old petrol station, that works.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff, right? Just kind of really proactive stuff. People started selling stuff out of windows in premises they would never have dreamed of doing, and offering different services. We all became, eaters of restaurant quality food that we cooked at home, that we bought boxes. Who thought we'd do that stuff, right? The proactivity was just amazing in so many different industries. And in recruiting and talent acquisition, you saw recruiters who were, downing tools for a few months. They had nothing to do. And the businesses that kept them, they engaged in onboarding. They built new HR processes. They helped folks get new assets delivered to new employees, loads of things. It was just fantastic. And if you've worked and lived through that, everything can be done. Whereas previously there was an attitude of, oh no, you can't be doing that, right? But to come to Jen Lambert's point, start from a place of yes, that's where we live now. Or Ed Nathanson in his episode, who gave a simple one, which was, why not? You know, we used to say how, and I think after the first few months of the pandemic, we said, yeah, why not? We did it then. Let's do it again. But Holly, I'm going to ask you. You know, we've talked about the year so far, the themes we heard over 40 episodes. I'm going to bring it into next year. Right? I know it's always foolish to try and predict the year ahead, but I thought what we might do is take out themes that we think will persist or develop into next year, into 2022. If you're listening to this in 2022, you can tell us what they are. And I'm going to start.
Were we right?
Well, we see we're right. You know, the theme that I've seen emerge this year is the theme of what's called ESG, right? For those who are not familiar with that, it's environmental, social, and governance. I didn't have a clue what ESG was as an acronym when I first heard it, but ESG it really is the umbrella that incorporates DE&I, but it also incorporates, you know, social responsibility, environmental responsibility, and it's become a huge thing. Initially in the world of investment, probably started in when, you know, the investment world started looking at, you know, investing in more responsible organizations. People had a high ESG score. Banks and financiers started giving preferential rates for that. People started asking about, you know, a company's ESG stance. And more recently, employees are formalizing this and saying, we want to understand, yes, your diversity and inclusion policies, but where do you stand in the environment? Are you doing good? Who owns your company? Who makes money? What you do with the money that you make? You know, all these different pieces that come under the ESG umbrella. We had Jerry Crispin on in actually the end of the prior year, the end of 2019, I think, or maybe it was a year ago. I lose track of time, Holly. Jerry Crispin he talked to us about, at the time, a NASDAQ requirement that had just come in for reporting or publishing of your diversity levels within your board, which come in for NASDAQ quoted companies last year. And that will then, through an ISO standard that Jerry introduced to us, is likely to come in across multiple areas of ESG. I'm hearing from leaders in talent and talent acquisition. They're saying that they might have been with companies 5, 10, 15 years. For the first time ever this year, they've been asked to present to the board and to the CEO on talent stats, you know, because it's a big part of your environmental, social, and governance piece, you know, are these issues. So I think that's where, you know, you talk about Ger Finn's quote about, you know, we're at a really interesting time, and it could have decades of effect. ESG is one of those things I think we're going to be a big theme. It's going to become bigger and bigger in our employer brand, and, you know, in terms of the metrics that we need to feed into the wider business at a board level, because they're going to be needing to demonstrate these stats for a whole host of reasons, for shareholder reasons, investment reasons, employee reasons. So I think we're going to see DE&I not just persist, but expand, you know, and be there more formally as a thing you just have to have, and hopefully, to Ger Finn's predictions, for decades to come. So that's my first one. How about you?
I just to pick up on that, I think actually just specifically around what are the assumptions that we come to this prediction with, going back to some of our earlier quotes around why do we predict these kinds of things, and the extraordinary shifts that have been made in the past 2 years, based on, like, from Larry Fink's annual letter to BlackRock shareholders and that investment fund, etc. Around long-termism, to activist investors inside absolutely enormous companies like from ExxonMobil and Shell, you know, suddenly going, oh, we're actually going to actively not produce oil anymore. Could you imagine that happening even 5 years ago? But now that these activist investors are inside those organizations, they're burrowing in from the inside, and it's cultural change from the board level on downwards. But as well as employees, right? It's, as you say, it's employees who want different things, but they've seen what's happened over the past 2 years, and they've corralled that individual voice they have into a chorus of calls for something being really important. So definitely, I think the ESG piece is just what is best for the long term. And in terms of what's best for the long term, I think hybrid working is here for the long term, right? It is here to stay. We're no longer are we going to be going to a place of work. I think we will go to a place of work for very specific purposes. If you are a person who delivers a service to other service users, and that needs to be delivered somehow in person, then yes, of course, that's going to continue for you as a place of work. But ultimately, the vast majority of roles that are moving into into thought work rather than necessarily like service delivery and things like that. But the high-end service economies that most of our organizations will start to move towards, working remotely or from outside of the company, right, outside of our address, is because this is where your work gets done. But where collaboration might happen might be inside an organization's like a headquarters of some kind, maybe, or maybe it's just like, here's a rented function room in a location that happens to be convenient for more people than the office is. But hybrid working, this is a generalist term of you could work from absolutely anywhere. Location is independent of the organization. And I think that's definitely here for the long term. And not only are like people just downright refusing to come back to work, or come back to a workplace, more should I say, it also speaks to diversity, because suddenly it opens opportunity for more people when you have the ability to work from anywhere. And also it's more environmentally responsible, right? We're no longer commuting long distances. We're no longer having to do spend acres of time alone in cars through traffic, etc. So I think hybrid working is here to stay for more reasons than we think. It's not just the fact that it's cheaper for a company to have less office space. It is actually fundamentally better for the world, I think, and therefore it is definitely here to stay.
I totally agree. By the way, quick shout out to Jeremy Roberts who's listening live. Jeremy, great to have you listening into the show, and thanks for joining us. I'd agree on the hybrid working for sure. Holly, people are talking about when do we return to the office. I saw some company saying 2023. It's like, what?
Why bother?
Just say, like, this is the way we're working. We'll have a combination of office, not office, for the roles that do allow it, of course, or can allow it. But it's something you have to more accept. But it's still not solved. It is not solved for a whole bunch of organizations. But I mean, before I dig into that again, because we spent a lot talking about that in the past, and it's a whole show or more, I think, if we're to dig into it. My next and last prediction is probably around how we hire. I think because the economy's gone kind of weird, and we have such a lack of in-demand talent, as in a lack of the talent that we demand to have in the marketplace, I think you're seeing organizations already have and will continue to further move into what's often called skills-based hiring or strengths-based hiring. And I use that as a contrast to experience-based hiring. As in, you don't just you can't hire somebody for most jobs who has the job title you're looking for and has the experience in a similar company. It just isn't happening. It's not enough talent out there. So organizations are being forced to say, well, what are the core competencies or skills or strengths required to be successful in this role? And we're going to be more open to people from different backgrounds who might demonstrate those skills and strengths. So it changes the way you have to hire, interview, assess. Of course, you have to really change that. And that's easier for recruiting teams than it is for hiring managers, right? But you also, as you said, there's an impact on hybrid working for things like DE&I. There's an impact on this for DE&I. More folks are being considered from more backgrounds. I was on a call this morning and we were talking about hiring recruiters and hiring recruiters who are, yes, from different professions that probably wouldn't be considered before, but also a company were telling me that they're trying to encourage their current team's mothers and fathers to apply for jobs as recruiters and get trained up. Like, I had somebody say this morning, there's a lot of untapped people in their 50s and 60s who could be great recruiters. I'm thinking, this is brilliant, right? There's loads of other places that you could go for. I'm going to call out a couple of comments that are in here. Jeremy Roberts saying, I'm doing a new job where I actually need to learn from peers. An office would be great for that, but not necessarily once I am ramped up. And this is the thing about hybrid, Jeremy. It doesn't mean all remote, right? That's not, I think, what we're saying either. There's a time for in-person, there's a time for remote. And social talent, we recognize our team absolutely want to see each other. They just don't feel the need to see each other to do work. So we're really active in creating opportunities to go for lunch, dinner, catch up. But don't do work while you're doing that. Keep work in a way that works for everyone else, which for us is remote, but not for everybody. And it's a really good point. If you're newer in a business or you really need to learn off people, maybe Zoom just our Teams doesn't work for you. And then George LaRock, think of the pressure they've relieved by pushing a return to the office in 2023. It's much more pragmatic than trying to chase normal. You're so right, George, right? And George, very well-known analyst in the community and trend spotter. For sure, you're dead right. It's kind of go away. It's like 2023 means sometime in the future. I think it doesn't mean 2023. It's kind of saying just stop talking about this for the next year and move on, right? Normal is this. Why wouldn't this be normal? It's just different, right? I was talking to somebody recently about a younger colleague who hadn't worked in a world, or doesn't remember a world before 9/11. I talked about transport. Transport was very different pre 9/11 for me, for all of us who traveled, did air travel pre 9/11. It changed and never went back. Like the way that what people think of normal air travel today, if you're of a certain age, that isn't normal for those of us who are older who traveled before 9/11. It just became the way the world was, moved on. And this is the way we've moved on. We'll have masks, we'll have different things and vaccinations for a while. It just won't be as big.
Do you remember a time when people were able to smoke in a restaurant or a bar?
I remember in a plane, Holly, the first time I ever got in a plane, you could smoke.
I'm not quite old enough for that.
Plane. That's maybe show my age, but and I hate smoke. And so I sit up the front of the plane. But to think of it, you're going to really half the plane were smoking. It's kind of mental.
And they swap with one another.
But I don't want to run out of time, right? Let's jump into I have skills and strength-based hiring. It's there at the moment. It's going to keep going further because the market demands it, but it's a better way to assess talent. I'll move you to your last prediction, Holly.
Well, actually, it quite nicely links in with a better way to assess talent. And also comes to something that Jeremy had mentioned about that kind of transfer of tacit knowledge. So when having a place to work can be really nice in order to do that. But we often think about promotions as being kind of, unfortunately, they often tend to be proximity based, because we can see the visual, see that we can visually see that a person is achieving their work. And also we have a much more ability to build a relationship with employees when we see them in person. And therefore, I think internal mobility is going to be a huge challenge over the next 12 months in particular, because a lot of people who were hired, let's say at the beginning of the pandemic for new roles, or even in the last even the last 6 months, who are due or can be, eligible for promotion inside an organization now, or kind of are definitely ready to do that because they've definitely elevated up. They haven't been in an office, right? They haven't had that in-person relationship with their manager, to therefore have other internal mobility opportunities, kind of, and have that kind of career place. Or career conversations. Internal mobility is going to be a huge challenge. I think hybrid working is a manager's challenge rather than an employee's challenge. And internal mobility is one of the biggest ones for that, because we just don't have the visual anymore. So we just need new ways to identify and nurture people's ability to be promotable and therefore get promoted. But similarly, the age-old thing that managers always have, which is, I can't afford to lose my best person. I know she deserves a promotion, but I can't afford to lose her where she is to move over to this other amazing team because she's doing such amazing work within our team. It is important, I think, that obviously we keep as many people as we can inside the organizations. The Great Resignation over the past year has definitely decimated talent inside our companies, and internal mobility, or lack of, has been one of the biggest causes for that, as well as just bad managers not being human. Definitely people be like, I quit, I move into somewhere else. So yeah, that's my prediction. Internal mobility being challenging next year.
Totally agree. It's a new philosophy for talent. It's complicated. It takes a decade or so to fix in an organization, potentially. Culturally huge. I remember talking, I spoke to the group of leaders this year, and I mentioned internal mobility. They went, oh yeah, like people being promoted. I said, yeah. What else? Like that's not the end of it. To Bev Kay, one of our guests this year, her point, the only way is not up. There's more ways to go, and we have a lot of talent hoarders out there, and that's a typical leader, right? As opposed to letting folks go. But there's a lot of challenges to that. You've got process challenges in the recruiting process. You've got leader challenges in terms of their hoarders. They don't know how to support that. They don't want to support that. And then the individuals in an organization often don't know where to go to find the jobs. How do you get a job internally? I've worked here for 15 years. How do I move departments? Is that possible? What skills do I need? It's complicated, right? But that's the talent world we live in, and the market forces us to do that. You have to, look at your internal talent, perhaps over and above external talent, and change that focus. Talent acquisition, which often in the TA world, you had separate teams, one for internal, one for external. I think it's talent, and you see more talent teams come together. We've seen this in the last few years. But I think there's tons there to work with. I think they're probably safe enough predictions. We're we're not just deliberately going after safe predictions. We do believe they are the ones. So the ESG focus, hybrid working, skills-based or strengths-based hiring, and internal mobility. There are 4 themes. You heard them here, and we'll see how they played out during 2022. Holly, thanks for joining me on this. You might stay with me while I close out the show. We're going to go from the future to the past next week for our final show of the year. I'm really excited about this. I'm going to be joined by the wonderful Jerry Crispin. He's a principal and co-founder of Career Crossroads. And more than that, he's the godfather of recruitment. And what Jerry doesn't know about recruiting isn't worth knowing. But Jerry's going to be coming on to talk about the history of recruitment. And this is going to be a fun show because Jerry was involved in a project this year where he worked with a bunch of folks, myself and some of the people who are listening here today, to crowdsource what is the ultimate history of recruiting. And he shared it with me recently, and it's fascinating. So you're going to have an opportunity to hear him go through that, to find out things about this profession, this industry. You never knew some of the root causes of some of the things that we accept day to day. You probably didn't even know about. Some of the milestones of the big companies, the big events that happened. And that's going to be next week, just before Christmas, Wednesday, 22nd of December. It might be your final day in the office. If so, do join us for hopefully 45 minutes of really interesting, insightful chat. That's at 4 p.m. UK Ireland time. It's 11 a.m. on the East Coast of the US, 8 a.m. on the West Coast. And you can find that by going to socialtalent.com/the shortlist. Go to YouTube, Social Talent, or go to my LinkedIn profile, or you can catch the audio podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts by Wednesday evening next week. So do join us for a bit of the past to complement the future that we've brought you here today. Thanks, Holly. Thanks to you for listening. We'll see you next week.